Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. Lucas woke up abruptly, emerging from a disturbing dream in which he dreamed that he was running along an endless corridor, choking with fatigue and despair, trying to catch up with Emma, moving away from him with every step, as if dissolving in the twilight. My heart was pounding in my chest and cold sweat broke out on my forehead. He sat up in bed with a jerk, not immediately realizing where he was. Gradually, his consciousness cleared, and he recognized their cozy bedroom. A soft darkness reigned in the room, as if the whole world was frozen in the silence of the pre-dawn hour. Only the faint glare of street lamps, penetrating through the heavy curtains, left unsteady reflections on the walls, similar to the reflections of ghostly waves. The air was still and saturated with the light scent of jasmine, her and Emma's favorite candles, which she often lit in the evenings. Emma lay next to him, turned to the wall. Her breathing was even and deep, almost lulling. One curl had escaped from her hair and was touching her neck. Lucas looked at her, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. 4 years of marriage, and every morning he woke up grateful that she was there. Over the years, they went through a lot, joys and quarrels, night conversations until dawn and silence, in which, at times, there was more understanding than in words. He carefully touched her shoulder, trying not to wake her, and lay down again, listening to the beat of her heart, barely audible in the silence. Somewhere outside the window, the rumble of a passing car was heard, and Lucas couldn't help but think, what did this dream mean? Why does he feel like he's losing her over and over again, even when she's around? Lucas was about to close his eyes again when suddenly the quiet but persistent signal of the phone cut through the silence. The vibration came from Emma's bedside table. He turned and looked at his watch, 2:17 am. Who could it be at a time like this? Lucas thought, feeling his heart speed up slightly. Emma didn't even move. The phone went silent, but almost immediately a series of short vibrations followed, indicating a new message. Lucas froze, hesitating for a few seconds. He had never read Emma's messages before, respecting her privacy, but something inside made him listen to his uneasy feeling. Carefully, almost silently, he raised himself on his elbow and looked at his sleeping wife. Emma's face seemed so serene that he even felt a pang of guilt. But curiosity and anxiety turned out to be stronger. He reached for the phone and took it carefully, glancing at Emma and praying that she wouldn't wake up. The screen glowed in the darkness, and Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat from the rush of adrenaline. His hand trembled involuntarily, his fingers became cold, as if his veins were filled with ice. He slowly reached for the phone, trying not to wake Emma, whose breathing continued to sound evenly in the silence of the room. The fingers slid over the print, but the screen asked for a password, the usual 4 digits. The 6th of September is their wedding anniversary, so 609. This date always brought out a warm and slight smile in him, reminding him of a sunny day in the old town hall, where Emma, in a soft peach dress, said, "I do," to him. But now the combination of numbers seemed cold and alien, like a code to something forbidden. The screen flashed and Lucas was immediately in Emma's DMs. His eyes glanced over the usual correspondence with girlfriends and colleagues before his gaze settled on the name he had seen for the first time. Brandon. Lucas's heart sank with a spasm. He did not know anyone with that name, either among her friends or colleagues. My chest felt tight, as if a belt had been pulled tight. The finger belatedly, as if against his will, touched the screen, opening the message. The words hit him like a gust of icy wind in the face. He read them twice, not believing his eyes. "I can still taste your lips on mine. Your smell is driving me crazy. I never thought sex in a car could be so hot. I'm burning with desire to do it all again. Will you be able to make it out tomorrow night? We need more time than today." Lucas's world seemed to be covered with a dull sound wave. His breathing became ragged, and there was a rumble in his head, as if there was a sudden drop in blood pressure. My fingers went numb, and the phone almost slipped out of my hands. He slowly lowered it to his knees and stared into the darkness of the room, trying to cope with the surging emotions. Anger flashed like lightning, but was immediately replaced by painful, almost physical distrust. Her face, her smile, the way yesterday, sitting at the evening table, she told him about a difficult day at work. Her touches at night, all of this suddenly began to look like a lie. His Emma, the one with whom he dreamed of children and old age on the veranda of the house by the sea, could she be capable of this? Lucas felt panic rising in his chest. Everything around lost clarity. Their cozy bedroom with books on the shelf, photographs from trips, a soft blanket at the head, all this now seemed like a set built for another performance. And he, as it turned out, was not the hero of this play, but its deluded spectator. His gaze slid back to Emma's sleeping form. The face, which he knew down to the smallest features, now looked almost alien. Could she really? He asked himself in silence, feeling how his inner world was cracking at the seams, and the fragments of these cracks were painfully digging into his heart. Lord, Emma, he whispered barely audibly, looking at his wife, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had broken out in her husband's soul. Lucas felt his throat constrict with pain, and his chest felt like an icy arrow had pierced him. He quickly, almost frantically, returned the phone to the bedside table, placing it in exactly the same position, as if this could erase the fact of what he had read. My heart was beating like a deafening drum in my temples, and my chest was compressed so hard that it seemed like there wasn't enough air to take even one full breath. Lucas lay back down, eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling, where the shadows from the lanterns danced. But even these dim reflections now seemed sharp and alien. Thoughts were spinning at breakneck speed, colliding with each other, collapsing in chaos. Was he trying to find an excuse? Maybe this is a prank? Error? But every word from Brandon's correspondence echoed in his head too frankly, too specific. Pain squeezed his stomach, as if an invisible hand was twisting his insides. He suddenly remembered how, just a few weeks ago, Emma came home late, citing overtime at the office. How she shuddered slightly when he approached her with a hug, and how quickly she turned the conversation to something mundane. Or that moment when she was sitting on the sofa with the phone and a strange, elusive smile flashed in the corners of her lips, not that warm, familiar, but somehow distant. Then Lucas decided not to attach any importance to it, but now these little things have merged into a single, bitter canvas. The body itself obeyed panic. He sat up abruptly, not noticing how the mattress springs creaked under him. The scent of jasmine still hung in the room, but now it seemed heavy and stuffy. Lucas stood up and quickly walked out onto the balcony, quietly closing the glass door behind him so as not to wake Emma. The night air greeted him with an icy stab in the face. The dark city spread out in front of him. Deserted streets, orange spots of lanterns, rare silhouettes of cars in the distance. Lucas leaned against the cold metal railing and closed his eyes, feeling dizzy. It seemed that the whole reality had shifted, the usual order of things had collapsed overnight. God. His voice sounded strangled, almost a whisper. What should I do now? His fingers gripped the railing so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The emptiness that filled my chest grew and became something viscous and unbearably heavy. Everything, vacation plans, conversations about the future, laughter at dinner, it seemed like it was just thin ice over an abyss that had finally cracked. Lucas stood in the silence of the night, alone with the new reality, and realized that there was no turning back. Returning to the room, Lucas quietly closed the balcony door behind him and froze in the twilight. His gaze fell on Emma, and he could not take his eyes off her face. She lay curled up on her side, with that calm expression that he loved so much, soft features, long dark hair scattered across the pillow in disarray. Her breathing was as even and measured as always, but for Lucas everything had changed. This familiar closeness now seemed deceptive, almost cruel. He stood for so long that it seemed to him as if time had stood still, suspended between his heartbeat and pain. It was on this cold March night, with its dampness and pre-dawn grayness that filled the room through loosely closed curtains, that Lucas's old life ended. Everything that seemed solid, trust, habits, the warmth of their little world suddenly crumbled into dust. Now ahead of him were painful conversations, long hours of silent tension, and the inevitable struggle for what he had always considered unshakable and eternal. And yet, through all this growing lump of pain and fear, like a sharp splinter, one single question relentlessly pulsed. Who the hell is Brandon, and how long has Emma been playing a double game? How long had he been blind to this? How many times did he explain her coldness and avoidance of intimacy as fatigue, stress, or his imagination? By morning, he found himself in the kitchen, not remembering how he got there. He sat, almost motionless, at a small table, lit by a dim lamp near the ceiling. In front of him stood a mug of coffee, which had long since cooled down and become bitter, like the experiences tearing him apart from the inside. Lucas slowly rotated it in his hands, watching his fingers tremble. The silence around seemed dull and unnatural, as if even the house was holding its breath. It was slowly getting light outside the window. The city woke up reluctantly, and the sky above it was painted in gray-pink shades, a mixture of cold clouds and the first timid rays of the sun. The landscape outside the window looked indifferent and even mocking. The world didn't collapse. Cars began to crawl along the streets, people were rushing to work, the streetlights were going out, giving way to daylight. Everything was as always. Everything except him. Lucas sat there, feeling the night continue to live inside him, tearing his heart apart. A night that took away his peace and left only pain, a premonition of a difficult choice and emptiness. Through the heavy haze of insomnia and pain, moments from the past flashed one after another before Lucas's eyes, bright and vivid, as if they had happened just yesterday. The evening he first saw Emma, he was at his friend Sam's party. She stood by the window, laughing at some joke, and the light from the sunset played in her dark hair. Lucas was instantly attracted to her smile, bright and infectious. He couldn't look away, and within a minute he approached her, plucking up the courage. "Hi, I'm Lucas," he said simply, holding out his hand. Emma turned to him, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, meeting him. "Emma," she answered, smiling and shaking his hand. "Are you here alone, or did your girlfriend go get some drinks?" Lucas laughed, already feeling the tension dissolve. "No, girl, I'm completely free," he admitted. "I wonder why such a nice guy is free?" Emma asked with a flirtatious smile and a raised eyebrow. "Perhaps because I was waiting to meet you," he said boldly, although his heart was beating like crazy. She laughed, and at that moment he already knew that he would not let her go so easily. Their first date took place a few days later in a cozy cafe on the outskirts of the city. They talked about everything, easily and naturally, as if they had known each other all their lives. Emma was witty, smart, and damn beautiful. Lucas couldn't stop looking at her, every moment making sure that he was falling more and more in love. "Do you know that your eyes are the color of coffee?" Emma suddenly asked, looking at him with a slight smile. "That's because I'm with you and have already drunk 4 cups," Lucas replied jokingly, smiling. She laughed, placing her hand gently on top of his. "I feel very good with you, Lucas." These words were then like salvation for him, like a promise of happiness, which he had been waiting for so long. But now, sitting in the semi-darkness of the empty kitchen, Lucas was painfully trying to understand at what moment everything went wrong. Why did the woman with whom he connected his life turn out to be a stranger? Maybe it all started when he got a promotion at work and had less time for his family. Or when Emma suddenly became interested in fitness and started staying late at the gym. These questions echoed in his head as he sat in the silence of their shared bedroom, where the faint scent of her perfume still hovered, mixed with the coolness of the night air that made its way through the slightly open window. Every sign now seemed obvious to him. Her indifference when she absent-mindedly answered his caring questions, the coldness in her voice that made his skin crawl. Lucas recalled how her hands began to feel alien, as if a thin but insurmountable wall had arisen between them. Even touches in rare moments of intimacy were tense and distant. Then he did not want to believe the obvious, clinging to the thoughts that these were only temporary difficulties associated with stress or fatigue. Lucas clenched his fists, feeling his nails digging painfully into his palms. but this pain was nothing compared to the one tearing him from the inside. Anger and resentment, like a black storm, slowly rose in my chest, poisoning every thought. He recalled how he recently tried to fix everything. Then he prepared for this evening as the most important event of their lives. He cleaned the apartment, put her favorite candles with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon on the table, and prepared pasta with porcini mushrooms and cream sauce, her favorite dish since they went to Tuscany. He even chose for dinner the same wine that they had once tasted together at a winery in a small Italian town. But Emma was somewhere far away. She sat at the table, mechanically twisting pasta with a fork, looking at her phone and then at her watch, as if her thoughts had long been outside these walls. She seemed more interested in time than in himself. Her eyes, in which Lucas had previously seen light and tenderness, were cold and clouded. At that moment, he felt something break inside him. It was as if their common world, once full of warmth and joy, was slowly crumbling into small fragments, leaving behind only emptiness and a feeling of loss. "Did something happen?" he asked then, feeling awkward. "No, I'm just tired," she answered coldly, avoiding his gaze. Now Lucas understood that even then she was not thinking about him. She was already with Brandon then, in thoughts or reality, and this fact was unbearable for him. How could I not see? He asked himself again and again, but there was no answer. Instead, details that he had not noticed before surfaced in his mind. Emma hid her phone, became irritated if he tried to find out more about her new job, new acquaintances. Lucas felt nauseous and stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the street, which was waking up as if nothing had happened. But everything changed for him. The old Emma disappeared, leaving in her place an unfamiliar woman capable of betraying and lying. Now he knew he couldn't live with it. He must find out the truth to the end and make a decision, even if it tears his heart into pieces. But first, he wanted to understand exactly when that bright, pure love that was at the very beginning of their relationship went downhill and turned into lies, betrayal, and pain. "I will find the answers," Lucas whispered into the morning silence, as if promising himself that he would no longer allow himself to be deceived. And although his heart was breaking with pain, he realized that there was no turning back. The past was in the past, and now he had to fight for the future, even if it meant destroying everything to the ground. Morning came quickly, jerking Lucas out of endless thoughts and memories, as if in a second when he had just closed his eyes to try to sleep. He heard Emma fidgeting in the bedroom and immediately tensed, feeling his body break out in a cold sweat. Taking a deep breath, Lucas forced himself to calm down, realizing that now was not the time to let go of his masks. "Good morning, honey," Emma's voice sounded with a barely noticeable hoarseness that once drove him crazy. "Good morning, dear," Lucas responded, carefully controlling his intonation and smiling as naturally as he could. Emma walked past him into the kitchen, lightly touching his shoulder with her hand, as if it were something ordinary, meaning nothing. He smelled her the same aroma of perfume that he liked so much before, but now only caused a painful prick inside. Lucas watched her with carefully hidden attention. She was making coffee, humming lightly to herself, and seemed absolutely happy and carefree. Only now did he notice small details, how often she glances at the phone, how casually she hides the screen from his gaze, how overly calm she behaves. "What are your plans for today?" Lucas asked, carefully feigning indifference. Emma shuddered slightly, but then smiled. "An ordinary day. Work, then fitness. Maybe I'll be a little late. There are reports that need to be completed." Lucas nodded, feeling a wave of anger rise within him that he could barely contain. "It's clear. Then I'll see you in the evening." "Yes, of course," Emma replied, smiling again and quickly turning away to pour some coffee. He noticed how her hands trembled as she held the cup, and inside he felt a dark satisfaction. She was nervous, although she tried to hide it. Emma drank her coffee quickly, almost without speaking, after which she packed her things and left for work, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts and the feeling that he was now caught in a strange and cruel mind game. Left alone in a dimly lit apartment, where even the silence seemed oppressive and viscous, Lucas could not find a place for himself. The soft light of the table lamp lay in blurry spots on the walls, casting strange shadows as if the room itself was participating in his internal struggle. He replayed Emma's every move, every intonation, every glance over the past weeks in his head over and over again. Why hadn't he noticed her nervousness before those awkward smiles and overly hasty explanations? Why did you mistake her absent-minded answers and forced gaiety for fatigue? Now everything fell into place. Her habit of averting her eyes, short telephone conversations that she ended as soon as he entered the room. The seconds in which she typed messages and abruptly turned off the phone screen as soon as he approached. He felt a heaviness accumulating inside him, as if a stone had settled in his chest, cold and unbearable. He sank into a chair in front of the computer and tried to immerse himself in his work, but the mouse cursor froze indifferently on the screen and the text blurred before his eyes. Everything inside was focused on only one thing: Emma. He recalled their recent conversations, how she talked about new friends from the gym, about how after training she sometimes stays for tea with the girls to discuss plans for the weekend. It would seem like ordinary little things. But now even these phrases sounded false. Lucas began to analyze her words, as if putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and gradually began to notice cracks in their reality. He remembered how she confidently said that she signed up for yoga 3 times a week, but later, out of curiosity, he went to the club's website and saw that classes were only held on Mondays and Thursdays. The inconsistency that he had ignored then now surfaced in front of him like evidence at a crime scene. She's lying, he thought bitterly, feeling his heart pounding in his temples. She lies about everything. The bitterness inside grew into cold determination. Lose your temper, throw a scandal, throw all your emotions out? No, that would be too easy. Lucas knew he couldn't act impulsively now. He must keep his cool, even if there was a hurricane raging inside. He picked up a notepad and began making notes, key details, oddities that had previously escaped him. It was as if he was compiling a dossier on a stranger, although it was about his own wife. Thoughts became clearer and more collected, as if emotions were receding, giving way to cold calculation. An hour later, he was already carefully thinking through his strategy. The plan was simple: play the role of the unsuspecting husband, patiently and methodically collecting the facts. Lucas realized that if he wanted to get to the bottom of the truth, he would have to become what he had never been: a pathfinder in his own family. He spent the night poring over forums and tutorials until he found an app to track his phone's location. Working with him turned out to be easier than he expected. He installed it secretly, taking advantage of the moment when Emma left the phone in the kitchen while she was in the shower. His hands were shaking, his heart was beating wildly. It was a violation of everything he considered moral, but in that moment, the fear of losing control was stronger. When the app confirmed successful installation, he felt a strange mixture of relief and shame. He felt like both a detective and a traitor, as if he was balancing on a fine line between protecting his family and violating his personal space. But there was no turning back. From now on, every step she takes, every deviation from the route, every visit to a cafe or unknown address will be in front of him, in full view. Lucas closed his laptop and took a deep breath. Outside the window, a cold dawn was beginning to bloom, painting the city in pale gray tones. He knew this was just the beginning. By the evening, when Emma returned home, Lucas was completely ready to play, deciding to remain calm and at ease. Emma seemed confident that everything was fine, but he noticed small signs of her tension: smiling too often, exaggerated concern, avoiding long glances. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to sound friendly. "Great, a lot of work, I'm tired," she answered with her usual phrase. Lucas noticed how she immediately headed to the shower, as if trying to wash off not only her fatigue, but also the traces of her double life. He sat on the couch, waiting for her to return, wondering how far she could go with her lies. Emma came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel. She approached him, gently touching his hand. "Maybe we can watch a movie tonight." Lucas smiled, feeling his heart clench painfully from her feigned affection. Of course, why not? He turned on the movie, but didn't watch it. His mind was occupied with another, much more serious and dangerous game, which Emma had started without his consent, and now he had only one thing left to do: outplay her in her own cunning. The next day, as soon as Emma left the house, Lucas immediately opened his laptop and launched the application that he had secretly installed on her phone the day before. The screen came to life, displaying his wife's exact geolocation in real time. He held his breath as he watched the icon slowly move through the streets of the city, heading completely different from where her office was located. Instead of the usual route to her place of work, she turned to a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Lucas's heart began to beat faster. "What did you forget there, Emma?" he muttered, closely watching the screen. The icon stopped at a cafe, and Lucas opened the satellite view to get a better look at the area. It was a quiet, secluded place ideal for meetings that needed to be hidden from prying eyes. He felt a chill of foreboding run down his spine. Who is he, Emma? Is this the same Brandon? Painful images appeared in his head. His wife smiling at another man, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm the way she used to touch Lucas. These thoughts made my heart clench painfully. Lucas waited for almost an hour, watching as the badge was still in place. He couldn't sit idle any longer. Getting up, he took the car keys and followed, deciding to see everything with his own eyes. When he arrived at the cafe, he immediately saw Emma's car parked near the entrance. He stopped at a safe distance, hiding around the corner of the building. His gaze quickly slid across the windows, and almost immediately he noticed her at a table in the company of an unfamiliar man. My heart began to beat wildly. Lucas couldn't see his face clearly, but the behavior of both of them spoke for itself. They sat close, laughed, sometimes touching each other's hands. Emma's every gesture now seemed openly provocative to him. "Damn it, Emma," he whispered, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. He took a photo of them with his phone, feeling a cold, furious determination building inside him. Now he knew for sure that his suspicions were not groundless. Emma lied to him, cheated on him, and betrayed his love. Lucas returned home distraught, feeling defeated but incredibly determined. He understood that now he needed to act with intelligence, patience, and caution. Returning to his laptop, he carefully examined all the capabilities of the installed application, discovering that he could not only track Emma's movements, but also view her messages, calls, and photos. With a heavy heart, he began to plunge into this dark side of his wife's life, deciding to go to the end in order to understand the whole truth, and only then decide what to do next. Emma's every move was now under his control, and Lucas already knew that this game would be cruel, but he was ready for anything. Lucas stood for a long time in front of the electronics store, feeling shame and anger fighting inside him. He understood that installing hidden cameras was a step after which his relationship with Emma would never be the same. But the pain from her betrayal was too strong, and doubts quickly dissolved in the determination to get to the bottom of the truth. He bought several miniature cameras that were easily hidden in interior items and were almost invisible. Once home, Lucas began carefully planning where to install each one. The first camera found its place in the living room, hidden in the bookcase between the volumes that Emma had never touched. The second ended up in the bedroom, discreetly integrated into a decorative vase on the chest of drawers. He decided to install the latter in the hallway, hiding it in a small figurine standing on a shelf next to the door. When he finished, Lucas checked the image on his phone. Visibility was perfect, every room was clearly visible, and he could follow what was happening in real time. The next morning was especially difficult. Lucas pretended to go to work, wishing Emma a good day with his usual smile. After leaving the house, he immediately went to a small cafe nearby, sat down in the far corner, and opened the application to view cameras. His heart was beating fast. Every minute seemed like an eternity to him. For the first hours, nothing happened. Emma calmly got ready for work, made coffee, and checked something on her phone. Suddenly, the phone rang and Lucas tensed up, carefully watching her reaction. She answered quickly, her voice soft and warm. "Yes, of course, come," he heard Emma's quiet words, and his heart skipped a beat. Lucas almost forgot to breathe as he stared at his phone screen. 20 minutes later, The doorbell sounded, and Emma hurried to open the door. Brandon stood in the doorway. Lucas could see him clearly now. A tall man with dark hair, a confident gait, and a smile that never seemed to leave his face. He walked in, Emma closed the door, and immediately they were in each other's arms. Lucas felt his stomach clench from a sharp pain, and his fists clenched involuntarily. Emma led him into the living room, where they sat on the sofa, wrapped in each other's arms. The camera clearly recorded every movement, every touch. Lucas saw his wife laugh at Brandon's words, leaning slightly towards him as they exchanged tender glances and touches. But the most painful moment was when they headed to the bedroom. Lucas felt his throat constrict, his heart pounding in his ears, and tears of powerless rage and despair welling in his eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off, although he was well aware that this would only bring him even more pain. With difficulty forcing himself to close the application, he sat for a long time at the cafe table, looking at one point, trying to realize that his life had just completely collapsed. Emma didn't just cheat on him, she brought her lover straight into their home, desecrating the place that was their joint refuge. After several hours of useless sitting in the cafe, Lucas forced himself to get up and return home. When he crossed the threshold, the house seemed different, alien, saturated with deception and betrayal. Lucas sank down onto the couch where Emma and Brandon had just recently sat and felt anger wash over him again. He decided not to tell Emma what he saw until he had enough evidence to destroy all her lies completely and irrevocably. Each subsequent day, Lucas continued to monitor Emma through cameras, collecting evidence of her infidelity. He knew that every minute of observation brought him pain, but it was no longer possible to stop him. Now it was a matter of principle, to reveal the whole truth and deal with the consequences to the end. And while Emma continued to lead a double life, Lucas prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that he would have the hardest fight of his life. A fight for the truth, for one's own dignity, and for the opportunity to start life anew. Lucas began to notice changes in Emma's behavior almost immediately after learning about her secret meetings. Every day he carefully studied her movements and gestures, as if trying to find in them at least a hint of former warmth and tenderness. Instead, he increasingly felt the cold distance that had arisen between them. One evening, when the sky was just beginning to turn dark blue, Lucas quietly opened the apartment door and stepped inside. The sounds of the street remained behind the threshold, giving way to a heavy, viscous silence. He came earlier than usual deliberately, with the hope of taking Emma by surprise, catching her at the moment when the mask was removed, and seeing at least something real behind her cold detachment. She sat on the sofa, leaning over the phone, her fingers quickly sliding across the screen. Lucas noticed how her brows were slightly furrowed, her lips pursed, and her eyes reflected the blue light of the device. She didn't even turn her head when he entered. "Hello," he said quietly, listening to her every movement. "Hello," Emma answered briefly, as if out of habit, as if mechanically, and immediately returned to the phone again. He froze for a moment before he slowly sank down next to her on the couch. The air around them seemed to thicken. You could almost touch the tension with your hands. Lucas' heart was beating so loudly that he was sure she must hear it. "Did something happen?" "You look tired," he asked as softly as possible, trying to make his voice sound sincere, but without any hint of accusation. Emma reluctantly put her phone down and looked at him. There was no warmth, no anxiety, or even irritation in her gaze, only fatigue and boredom. She sighed slowly and shrugged. "It's just a lot of work," she said coldly. "And what?" Lucas carefully studied her face, her movements, how she crossed her arms, as if trying to isolate herself, how her eyes darted to the side, avoiding direct gaze. "I'm worried about you," he admitted after a short pause. "You've been kind of distant lately." Emma twitched the corner of her lips, almost imperceptibly, as if she was grinning. "Lucas, we're all getting tired," she said with a forced calm, in which he detected irritation. "You yourself haven't been glowing with joy in recent weeks. Why are you making a problem out of this?" He bit his lip, trying to keep inside all the pain and rage that was rising in him like a wave. But on the outside, cold self-control remained. I just want to understand what's going on, he answered calmly, although his voice trembled treacherously on the last words. Emma stood up abruptly from the sofa, her movements nervous and almost abrupt. Nothing is happening, she said, heading towards the kitchen. Just don't pester me, okay? Lucas remained seated, looking after her. Silence rang in his head. He heard her take out a cup and noisily open the tap. The sound of flowing water in the empty apartment sounded like a small, stubborn waterfall, as if trying to wash away the awkwardness that had just hung in the air. He felt something inside him finally breaking. This scene is painfully familiar and alien at the same time. The woman he knew was no longer in front of him. He saw only a cold shell, behind which was hidden a reality alien to him. Clenching his fists, he remained sitting, peering into the emptiness of the room, where before their common laughter filled the space with comfort. Now, in this silence, there was only the echo of broken ties and uninvited suspicions that became too obvious to ignore. In the following days, Emma's coldness became even more obvious. She stopped sharing her thoughts with him, avoided communication, and kept every conversation to a minimum. Even her voice seemed alien, devoid of its former warmth and affection. At night, she turned her back to him, defiantly moving to the very edge of the bed, as if his presence next to her caused her physical discomfort. Every time Lucas tried to hug her, she flinched and said tightly, "I'm very tired, let's not do it today." Lucas knew that her excuses were false, and each such excuse increased his inner rage and resentment. He felt rejected, unwanted, superfluous in her life. One evening, when Emma again refused to spend time together, citing urgent work matters, Lucas decided to look at her phone while she was taking a shower. His hands shook slightly, but his determination was firm. He quickly scrolled through the messages and noticed another letter from Brandon. "I can't wait for our next meeting. These hours with you are the best thing in my life. When will you be mine alone?" The message read. Lucas's heart sank painfully. He felt despair and anger mixing inside him, turning into a dangerous cocktail. Returning the phone to its place, he felt as if he were trapped, where every movement only brought him closer to the edge of the abyss. Returning from the shower, Emma noticed his intense gaze and asked dryly, "Is something wrong?" "No, everything is fine," Lucas answered with difficulty, restraining himself so as not to reveal his true feelings. Emma shrugged and lay down on the bed, turning away from him again. At night, Lucas lay staring at the ceiling, analyzing when and how they got to this point. He recalled times when their relationship was full of love, laughter, and understanding. Now, looking at his wife's cold back, he saw only a stranger whom he did not recognize. "She's not mine for a long time," he thought bitterly, feeling tears of betrayal welling up in his eyes. This night became a turning point for him. Lucas realized that this couldn't go on any longer. He must make a decision, no matter how painful it may be. He could no longer tolerate lies and betrayal. Lucas looked carefully at the calendar. The date circled in red marker was approaching the day of his fictitious business trip. He carefully prepared this trap, realizing that now was the moment of truth. At dinner, he tried to look natural and at ease, although his heart was beating faster from the upcoming conversation. "Emma, tomorrow I'll have to leave for a couple of days," he said calmly, without raising his eyes from his plate. Emma stopped before the fork reached her mouth and looked at him with unexpected interest. "Where? You didn't say anything," she noted suspiciously. "There was an urgent need to visit a client in another city. The boss called just an hour ago. There will be an important meeting. We need to leave urgently," Lucas explained, keeping his voice calm and confident. Emma looked at him carefully, trying to read something on his face, but Lucas carefully avoided her gaze, feigning complete indifference. "For how long?" she asked, returning to dinner again, more relaxed. "For 2 or 3 days. I hope not longer," Lucas replied, pretending to be busy eating. "I see," Emma answered with obvious relief in her voice, although she tried to hide it. "So, will the house be at my disposal?" Lucas felt his insides clench with anger, but he controlled himself and smiled as if nothing had happened. "Yes, you can consider yourself taking a little vacation from me." Emma laughed, but her laughter seemed forced and false to Lucas. "You know I'll miss you," she said, looking at him flirtatiously. "I'm sure," Lucas answered dryly, hiding the sarcasm in his voice. After dinner, Lucas deliberately began packing his things for the trip, creating the illusion that he was really going to leave. He folded shirts, suits, documents, feeling Emma's attentive gaze on him. She occasionally asked questions, trying to verify the reality of his business trip. "Are you sure you haven't forgotten anything?" she asked, leaning against the bedroom door and watching his actions. "It's okay," Lucas answered briefly, deliberately avoiding details. The next morning, Lucas played the play to the end. He said goodbye to Emma, kissing her on the cheek with feigned tenderness, feeling inside him a sharp disgust from her touch. "I'll call you in the evening," he promised, getting into the car and waving goodbye. Emma stood on the threshold of the house, smiling and watching him go. Lucas set off, drove onto the next street, and immediately turned into a secluded place, previously chosen for observation. He turned off the engine and took a deep breath, feeling his heart pounding in his ears from tension and excitement. Now all that remained was to wait and see what Emma would do while she was sure that he was far away. Now Lucas was ready to see her true colors and finally decide what to do next with their ruined life. Lucas parked the car a little further away in the shade of an old maple tree, where it was not visible from the road. The engine had long been turned off, but the tension in his body was so strong that it seemed as if the very air in the cabin was trembling with him. There was deep silence all around, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and the steady ticking of the clock on the dashboard. The moon dimly illuminated the hillock and part of the street, and the windows of his house in the distance seemed silent witnesses to his pain. He did not take his eyes off the bedroom window on the second floor, as if hypnotizing this rectangle of light, which was suddenly filled with the soft glow of the table lamp. Lucas knew what that meant. Emma was home. His palms were sweating as he pressed them against the steering wheel, and his heart was beating faster by the minute. It seemed that time itself had compressed into a heavy noose wrapped around his neck. An hour passed, or maybe an eternity, before a car appeared on the street, slowly and steadily pulling into the driveway. The headlights illuminated the front of the house for a second and then went out. Lucas looked at what was happening without blinking. His inner world split into cold fragments. In a split second, Brandon was driving. He couldn't be more wrong. A recognizable gait, confident movements standing in front of him was his old acquaintance, a person whom he had once trusted. Anger went to his head, but Lucas forced himself to remain motionless, as if he was afraid to give away his presence even through the walls of the car. He gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white and his nails almost dug into his skin. Meanwhile, as if in a bad dream, the door to the house swung open before Brandon could even climb the steps. Emma. Lucas barely recognized her. A short dress of dark blue hugged her body in such a way that it emphasized every curve that he had not felt nearby for a long time. She was wearing high heels, the same ones she used to wear only on special occasions. Her hair was pulled back into a messy but attractive bun, and her lips were glistening with fresh lipstick. But the most painful thing is her eyes, filled with light and impatience. Eyes he hadn't seen like this for a long time. She smiled widely and without hesitation threw herself into Brandon's arms, as if there were no obligations or shared past with Lucas. Their kiss was long and passionate, just as Lucas remembered them from the early years of their marriage. Only now this kiss belonged to someone else. It was as if a knife had passed through his heart, tearing it apart. It seemed as if all the air had been squeezed out of the lungs and the body was paralyzed. But he didn't look away. He watched as Emma took Brandon's hand and pulled him into the house, as if pulling him into a trap that Lucas himself had once stepped into with love and trust. The couple quickly walked into the living room. Lucas, having already set up hidden cameras in advance, turned on the application on his phone and was able to clearly see what was happening. Emma and Brandon sat on the couch, holding hands and laughing. Their conversation came through the app loud and clear. "Are you sure he won't come back?" Brandon asked, smiling and stroking her hand. "Certainly." Lucas went away for a few days for work. Emma replied with a chuckle. "We can have a quiet time." "I missed you," Brandon whispered, leaning towards her and kissing her neck. Emma closed her eyes, her face reflecting pleasure and desire. "I missed you too. You can't even imagine how," she said in a languid voice. Lucas felt sick from what he heard, but he couldn't stop watching, knowing that he needed to go through this to finally put an end to it. After some time, the couple moved to the bedroom, where cameras were also installed. Emma and Brandon could no longer restrain themselves. Passion and desire overwhelmed them both. They kissed, undressed, and Lucas could not take his eyes off, feeling the pain of how his wife gave herself to another. He watched as they immersed themselves in intimacy, as Emma was happy and liberated in the arms of another man. This scene evoked a storm of emotions in him, among which rage, resentment, and despair predominated. Lucas turned off the app, unable to bear this painful spectacle any longer. He sat motionless in the car, feeling his body trembling with suppressed anger and bitterness. How could she? How could all this happen? He thought, trying to control his emotions. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply and trying to calm down. Gradually, rage gave way to cold calculation. He already had enough evidence to force Emma to confess everything and understand how cruelly she had treated their marriage. Lucas sat in the car, feeling the pulse in his temples echoing loudly in his head. The cold night air coming through the slightly open window did not bring relief, it was constricting like a vice. My heart was beating not just fast, but with furious, desperate force, as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. A mixture of pain, betrayal, and anger seethed inside him. He didn't take his eyes off the bedroom window. Against the backdrop of soft, dim lighting, the blurry shadows of Emma and Brandon slowly moved around the room. Sometimes one shadow overlapped another, sometimes they merged into a single spot. Lucas saw how she leaned towards him, how her hands lay on the shoulders of another man, how the silhouettes moved closer and closer. With every second, what seemed like a nightmare became a frightening reality. His breathing became labored and his chest felt tight. Fingers instinctively grabbed the steering wheel, and the white knuckles began to ache painfully. At that moment, he was no longer the same calm and patient man who just an hour ago was sitting in the car and trying to find a rational way out. Anger boiled inside, as if the blood had become lava, ready to burst out. He slowly reached into the glove compartment, and his hand closed on a metal object. A pistol that he had once bought at the insistence of a friend for self-defense, and which had since been gathering dust without use. Now he lay in his hands, heavy and cold, like the night itself outside the window. Lucas felt the weapon become a part of him, as if it had taken on some of the rage that was bubbling in his soul. "That's enough," he breathed out through his lips, not recognizing his own voice. He stepped out of the car, feeling the ground beneath his feet seem unsteady, as if he were walking on thin ice. Approaching the house, Lucas stopped for a second. Through the slightly open window, he caught snatches of cheerful and carefree laughter, in which there was not a drop of regret or remorse. This laughter pierced him like a knife. He slowly, almost ritualistically, inserted the key into the keyhole and turned it so smoothly that the lock did not make a sound. The door gave way with a slight creak, and Lucas found himself inside. The house, which had once been a fortress for him, suddenly began to feel hostile and alien. It seemed that even the walls were looking at him with silent condemnation. He walked down the corridor slowly, almost silently, walking barefoot on the parquet floor, another precaution that seemed instinctive to him. The light from under the bedroom door cast a dim strip on the floor, and behind the door barely audible moans, quiet whispers, and the same laughter and sighs that used to belong to both of them, but now have become a treacherous echo of someone else's passion. Lucas stopped, feeling his breath hitch in his chest and his hands tremble with tension. He pushed the door, and it opened slightly. The scene that appeared before him was painfully clear, and at the same time unbearably painful. In the center of the room on their marital bed, under the warm glow of the lamp, Emma lay half-naked in Brandon's arms, their movements slow and filled with passion, their faces relaxed and happy. Lucas stood in the doorway, feeling the world around him crumble. The sound of my own heartbeat drowned out everything. He gripped the handle of the pistol, feeling the rush of adrenaline blurring the lines between rationality and primal rage. The pain that he had tried to hold back all these days, weeks, now burst out along with a wave of unbearable anger. And yet he stood there, silent, not taking a single step forward, watching the betrayal unfold before his eyes. His gaze darted between Emma and Brandon's face, between their entwined bodies and the very place that had once been a symbol of their love. And at that second Lucas realized he would never be the same. He stood in the shadows, unnoticed and silent, clutching his pistol and feeling his anger slowly begin to take over his reason. He listened to their conversation, trying to suppress the nausea of what he heard. "You make me feel alive," Emma whispered, clinging to Brandon. "You deserve better, Emma." "You deserve happiness," Brandon answered, kissing her hair. These words seemed to be the last straw. Lucas stepped out of the shadows, raising his gun and pointing it at Brandon. "Is this your happiness, Emma?" Lucas' voice sounded quiet, but so sharply that both turned sharply in his direction. Emma screamed in horror, instinctively moving away, and Brandon raised his hands, trying to calm Lucas. "Lucas, wait, we can discuss everything." Brandon's voice sounded tense, but Lucas did not lower his weapon. "Discuss? You both dared to betray me in my own home, in my own bed." His voice now rang with rage and pain. Emma began to cry, covering her face with her hands and trying to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. "Lucas, I'm sorry," she sobbed, but he abruptly cut her off with a gesture. "Don't talk to me about forgiveness. You ruined everything between us, Emma, and now you're asking for forgiveness." Brandon tried to stand up, but Lucas instantly pointed the gun straight at his chest. "Don't even think about it," he said coldly, and Brandon froze in place, looking at Lucas with undisguised fear. They were silent for several minutes, looking intensely at each other. Lucas felt the adrenaline slowly release, giving way to deep devastation and sadness. Lucas slammed the bedroom door so hard that their wedding photo fell off the shelf. Once it was a symbol of a happy life, but now the glass shattered into pieces with a crash. A pistol gleamed in Lucas's hand, and his gaze burned with cold fury. Emma and Brandon sat on the marital bed, taken by surprise. She is his wife, who once swore fidelity. He is a stranger who has come to take his husband's place. Both looked confused and scared. "No one will come out until I find out the whole truth," Lucas said quietly, in which bitterness and anger merged. "And don't let it reassure you that this is my home. I'm in charge here." Emma frantically clutched the sheet to her chest, and Brandon glanced wolfishly at the door. But Lucas raised his gun. "Don't even think about running. One pull, and I'll pull the trigger." A painful silence fell in the room. A moment ago, passion and excitement reigned here. Now fear and remorse reigned. "Lucas," Emma whispered, shrinking under the weight of his gaze. Be quiet," Lucas interrupted her. "I have one question for both of you. When did you start this?" Brandon tried to find the words. "We, for a long time. But that doesn't mean that." "Doesn't that mean?" Lucas interrupted, choking on sarcasm. "Do you think I'm a fool? You met at my house. While I believed that we were in a family crisis, you were having fun behind my back." Emma covered her face with her hands. "I don't know how to explain. We didn't want it to turn out like this." "You didn't want to?" Lucas asked. "Funny. If you didn't want to, you wouldn't have brought him here. I repeat, tell me everything. I'm tired of being in the dark." Brandon swallowed and spoke. "It lasted 6 months. At first, we were just friends. We met in a cafe. Then Emma complained about problems with you and said that you had grown cold. We both didn't plan anything serious, but—" "And they slept together," Lucas concluded. "Comfortable." "Yes," Brandon managed. "But you see, I didn't want to break your marriage. It just happened that way." "So it happened?" Lucas asked, clutching the gun. "Not a bad excuse. Emma, what about you? Didn't it occur to you to talk to me?" She sobbed. "I was afraid that you wouldn't hear me. I felt lonely, and he was nearby." At that moment, Lucas wished his heart was still beating. Betrayal burned his soul, and he almost lost control. But suddenly, he pulled a knife out of his pocket and threw it on the bed. If you want, you can decide everything yourself. If someone considers another guilty, take a knife and act. Maybe you're both cowards. They looked at the blade, but did not move. I no longer had the courage to argue or fight. Cowardice, Lucas smiled wryly. Fine. Then talk about money. Emma, you transferred large sums of money to him, right? She closed her eyes. Yes, about 8,000. He asked for help to pay off his debts. I took some of our savings. Ours? Lucas repeated bitterly. Wonderful. So she financed her lover. Brandon, are you proud of this? He lowered his head. I was going to return it. I didn't ask. You used it, Lucas said, and now you're sitting here like a beaten dog. Nice. Brandon clenched his fists, but understood that any sudden movement could result in a bullet. Emma cried, feeling the stupidity of her decisions. So you both voluntarily crushed my marriage, Lucas said. Wonderful. How many times have you met here already? Emma couldn't look him in the eyes. 3 or 4. Sorry. Sorry? He asked with a bitter smile. If you wanted to save the marriage, you would tell the truth. Or she left without playing behind my back. She just sobbed, and Lucas felt that any more and he would lose his mind. But he pulled himself together. He didn't want to become a killer. From this day on, he finally said, you are hostages of my rules. I don't know how this night will end. Perhaps I will forgive you, or perhaps I will do what I myself am afraid of. But for now, you will sit here. Any attempt to run, I shoot. He went to the door and locked it, putting the key in his pocket. The pistol remained in his hand. Lucas, Emma muttered, please don't. No need? He grinned. Did you need it when you arranged secret meetings? I didn't finish the conversation. He sat down on a chair by the closet, not taking his eyes off them. Brandon, tell me, did you plan for the future? Maybe you dreamed of living together. He began, stammering. I didn't know what exactly Emma wanted. We talked about how unhappy she was. Unhappy, Lucas repeated. And I, apparently, was happy all this time, believing that my wife was just tired. Amazing. And why didn't she leave? Emma answered for him. I myself didn't know what to do. I was afraid of your reaction, afraid of ruining everything. I hoped you wouldn't understand. This is the result, Lucas concluded. I understood everything, but in the most cruel way. A heavy silence hung in the room for a moment. Emotions were raging inside Lucas, and Emma and Brandon's hands and knees were shaking. Nobody dared to take a knife. The scene seemed absurd, like a one-man show where Lucas played the role of an avenger and they were extras. How much more would you have lied if I hadn't caught you? Lucas asked, scorching Emma with his gaze. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe another month, maybe more. We didn't think ahead. Lucas nodded grimly. Not bad. But now we are all here, and it seems to me that no one knows what will happen in an hour. How many more lies have you not uncovered? For example, where did the rest of our money go? Emma shook her head. No, that's all. I didn't take any more. Sure. He raised his voice. Or maybe you laughed at me together. Have you thought about running away? She cried bitterly. No, Lucas, we weren't going to run away. Brandon nodded. I didn't want to hurt her. And you too. Funny, Lucas chuckled. And yet you slept in my bed, spent my money, lied to my face. What would be more painful? Silence with a taste of bitterness hung over them. Lucas turned his gaze to the knife. None of you ever took it. Are you afraid of me, or just don't want to spoil your great love? You say terrible things, Emma whispered. And you made it even worse, he snapped. I can't forgive this, and I don't see the point. But I don't want to kill you either. I'm sitting here lost, not understanding where our life is going. He suddenly stood up sharply and bolted the door, after which he put the pistol in a holster under his jacket, making it clear that he was not going to shoot yet. Listen, Lucas, Brandon began. I understand that you are disgusted to look at me. But the truth is, Emma and I had an affair that we couldn't stop. This does not mean that we wanted to destroy you or ridicule you. So you just decided that my feelings don't exist, Lucas interrupted. You selfishly took from each other what I did not receive: attention, tenderness, money. Emma took a deep breath. I know I'm wrong. I should have told you the whole truth, but I was afraid. Lucas sighed, looking up at the ceiling. You talk about fear all the time. But you weren't afraid to bring him into our bedroom as soon as I left. I wasn't afraid that I would find the correspondence. She clenched her hands. Part of me hoped that things would somehow calm down. Maybe you won't notice. Maybe I'll stop myself. Belief in miracles. Lucas grinned with bitter irony. It's a pity that it didn't save us. Brandon looked up. Maybe we can at least go out and have a normal conversation without threats. No, Lucas snapped, until I decide otherwise. If I hadn't caught you, you would have continued to lie. The thought makes me sick. They fell silent again. Lucas slowly ran his hand down the barrel of the gun, as if testing his resolve. I think with every passing hour you realize more and more how deeply you have sunk me. But I want you to feel what it means to be locked in a hopeless dead end. This is exactly how I lived these 6 months, not knowing why my wife was cold, and I was like a stranger in my own home. Emma put her head in her hands. I'm so sorry. I can't fix this. But please don't keep Brandon here. Let me be alone. Lucas looked at her with narrowed eyes. It's funny. Are you protecting him? If I wanted to protect myself, I wouldn't bring him here. Or she wouldn't steal from our general budget. She sobbed, not knowing how to object. Brandon sighed heavily. Emma didn't steal. I didn't insist on another form of help. Maybe if we had more brains, we wouldn't have brought things to this point. Lucas responded with an icy look. Brains? You simply chose the path of least resistance, forgetting that every action has a price. Now you're paying. Lightning flashed outside the window and thunder rolled across the sky. It was as if nature itself echoed the raging passions in the room. In the light of the flash, the faces of all three became deathly pale. It looks like a thunderstorm is coming, Lucas noted, nodding towards the window. How symbolic. The same storm inside me. He stood up and walked closer to the bed, looking down at them. It looks like you're tired, but don't expect to rest. I still have a lot to figure out. And if you are going to lie, remember, I have all the evidence. Emma shook her head. I won't lie again, I swear. Let's see, Lucas said, turning to Brandon. Tell me, did you have any other connections with other women while you were having fun with my wife? He shook his head. No, I swear. I wasn't looking for any love affairs. Something just happened that I didn't expect. I didn't expect it, but I used it, Lucas clarified. Everything is clear. He went to the window, listening to the patter of rain. Then he turned, running his hand over his face. I need a little more time to decide what to do with you. You stay here. If you try to get out, you know how it will end. Lucas went out and locked the door. Now the corridor was flooded with moonlight, interspersed with flashes of lightning. The thunderstorm's roar grew louder, and the house seemed to shake along with Lucas's psyche. Inside the bedroom, Brandon put his arm around Emma, but she pulled away, not wanting to touch. They both understood that this situation revealed the entire falsity of their romance. Instead of romance, cold walls, a knife on the bed, a pistol in the hands of an insulted husband. Now they were more accomplices in disaster than happy lovers. Lucas stood outside the door, listening to the rain outside the windows. In his soul, he felt the same storm that could not find a way out except through this harsh interrogation. He knew he couldn't bring back the past. The only way left was through the bitter truth, humiliation, and tears. Maybe only after this, one day, he will find a way to move on. In the meantime, all three spent the night in captivity, becoming prisoners of a lie that grew into despair and fear. Lucas sat motionless, leaning his back against the wall of the empty corridor. His ears were buzzing with emotions overwhelming him. Rage, resentment, devastation. Outside the door, from the bedroom, I could hear Emma's muffled sobs and, from time to time, Brandon's quiet voice, trying to calm her down. It seemed like they were finally starting to realize how much of a terrible line they had crossed when they decided to betray his trust one day. He felt the insane need to ask even more questions growing inside him. It's as if the more details he learns, the more he sinks into his own darkness, and yet he can't stop. Lucas was no longer restrained by any logic, no pity. He wanted to pull out every detail so that the two of them, Emma and Brandon, would appear before him completely naked in their lies, without the opportunity to hide behind pathetic excuses. Finally, he stood up, feeling his legs go numb, and headed towards the door. The excited whisper died down as soon as he turned the key in the lock and went inside. Emma, with puffy eyes and disheveled hair, sat on the edge of the bed. Brandon stood nearby, his hands under the blanket, as if he was preparing to fend off a possible threat. Seeing the gun on Lucas' belt, he tensed even more. "How was your vacation?" Lucas chuckled sarcastically, standing up so he could see them both. "I hope you have had time to think about what you said, because I have new questions." He pulled a heavy chair towards him and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. The gun remained in plain view, adding menace to his already grim image. Emma was no longer crying. Her tears seemed to have dried up. She just looked at her husband, in whom she could hardly discern the person with whom she had once shared her joy and future. "Emma," Lucas began, "you said that all this happened because I didn't understand you, that I stopped being attentive. Fine, but I want to know how far you've gone in your relationship, and don't you dare lie again." His cold gaze flickered to Brandon. "And you answer too." Brandon swallowed. "We met not only here in the house. I tried to dissuade her from such a risk, but she said that she was not afraid, that you would never know. So you blame her, right?" Lucas interrupted with a sneer. "Are you saying that she insistently pulled you towards her?" "No, that's not what I'm talking about." Brandon tried to justify himself. "We're both to blame, I understand. But in reality, you are just two cowards who were afraid of reality." Lucas grinned wryly. "Well, let's give you reality." He stood up and walked closer to them, leaving only a couple of steps between himself and the bed. The room felt suffocatingly stuffy. Emma nervously pulled at the edge of the blanket, as if trying to hide. "I want to know everything about that evening when you made love for the first time in the car," Lucas said, feeling his insides clench. "What words did it start with? Who kissed whom first?" Emma's face showed a mixture of horror and humiliation. "Why? It's not. I need it," Lucas muttered. "Maybe you don't understand, but just hearing all these dirty details makes me realize what you've turned my life into." Emma began to speak, each syllable sounding like a blow to Lucas himself. She recalled how they were sitting in a car near the mall, and how Brandon put his hand on her knee. How she felt a rush of adrenaline, realizing that she was breaking all the rules, and how this feeling took over her completely. Lucas listened, interrupting from time to time and asking even more humiliating questions. "What words did he whisper to you? Where exactly on your body did he touch you first?" It was as if he needed her to say it out loud in front of him and Brandon himself. "Enough," Emma begged when the flow of her story stopped at the most frank place. "I can't take it anymore." "No, tell me," he shouted, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead from anger. "Since you wanted to lie and cheat, now come out into the world with all the details." She buried her face in her hands, but continued talking, and Brandon listened doomedly, not risking interrupting, seeing that Lucas was in a completely unstable state. The mention of intimate details became unbearable, as if they were reliving that moment, but now in the presence of an embittered husband. After several agonizing minutes, Emma finished her story, sobbing. Lucas was silent for a while, breathing heavily and as if digesting what he had heard. Then he turned to Brandon. "What do you say? Did it excite you to violate other people's boundaries? I understood perfectly well that you were sleeping with someone else's wife. Did you want danger?" "No," Brandon whispered. "It was not like that. I fell in love with her. It seemed to me that we were just looking for happiness." "Happiness," Lucas repeated bitterly. "And now this is it, right? Is happiness locked in one room with a gun pointed at your face? Brandon looked away. There was nothing to say to him. Lucas stepped back and picked up the small chair from the corner where the lamp had once stood. Sitting down on it, he rubbed his temples, trying to drive away the growing headache. I don't understand why you continued. He asked the question, as if he himself had not heard the answer. You could have stopped after the first time and admitted the mistake. But no, you moved on. Emma lowered her head guiltily. I thought that everything will work out, that this is temporary. And then I... She paused, and pain was visible in her gaze. Lucas felt something new, unspoken before, thickening in the air. Finish, he ordered harshly. There was a moment, she began quietly, with difficulty pronouncing the words, when I realized that I was pregnant. From Brandon. This phrase hung in the room like a knife over Lucas' heart. He stared at her, not immediately understanding the meaning of what he heard. Inside, all the feelings seemed to be mixed in a wild cocktail. Pregnant. He repeated almost silently. Do you want to say that you carried a child under your heart? This man? Emma's shoulders shook. Tears flowed from her eyes again. Yes, Lucas. This was a few months ago. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I decided to have an abortion because we were not ready, and I myself did not understand what I wanted. Brandon sat silently, looking at the floor. It was clear that this topic was also painful for him, although he never mentioned it to Lucas. Perhaps they both hoped that this truth would remain in the shadows. How? Lucas couldn't finish the sentence. He raised his eyes, which showed such shock that Emma involuntarily shuddered. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, Emma said barely audibly. I was afraid that you would kill me or Brandon if you found out. I didn't want to bring it to this at all. I hoped that everything would pass and we wouldn't cross that line completely. But it happened as it happened. So you were carrying his child. Lucas repeated, and in his head, this thought suddenly turned into something like the ringing of a bell. A child who could have been born if they had not decided to have an abortion. A person he did not know and would never know. Silence fell over the room. Even breathing began to seem indecently loud sounds. Emma tried to catch her husband's gaze, but he was in some kind of trance, as if immersed in his own thoughts, where he was digesting all these new facts. Brandon, feeling his own responsibility, did not dare to move. Suddenly, Lucas stood up and left the room before either of them could say anything. In the corridor, he stopped, pressing his hand to his forehead. There was not enough air, and it seemed to him that the walls began to narrow, as in a nightmare. His eyes began to shine feverishly. The thought that his wife was carrying someone else's child seemed unbearable. He stood leaning against the wall for about 5 minutes before returning again. When he walked in, he saw that Brandon and Emma were no longer sitting together. Emma had huddled in the corner of the bed, and Brandon was sitting on the floor with his legs crossed, looking like complete despair. The weapon was still on Lucas's belt, and he gave them no sign of approaching the door. And you decided that abortion was the best option, Lucas said in a lifeless tone. Did you remove the problem so that no one would find out? Emma shuddered and heard such a cold calm in his voice that she became even more scared. I didn't want to tell anyone. Yes, it was my choice. I understood that I couldn't handle it. Lucas nodded slowly, as if writing down her every answer in an imaginary book of deceit. Then he turned to Brandon. Did you know? Yes, he admitted guiltily. She told me she was pregnant, and I was confused. It seemed like I wanted a child, but I understood that then you would find out everything. It would be a disaster. We quarreled, and I said that I would support any of her choices. That means he supported me, Lucas smiled bitterly. Decided to take life out of the equation so that it doesn't interfere with your secret adventures. Brandon nodded dejectedly. It seemed that he could not find words of justification. It was obvious to him that Lucas was already on the edge, and his every word could add fuel to the fire. Lucas looked away. He seemed unable to look at them. His head was spinning, as if he was half-conscious. Thoughts jumped from the picture of a happy past to the nightmares of the present. a wife pregnant from another, an abortion he never knew about, a months-long deception. And all these lies have now come out, twisting his soul like a wet rag. "Well," he finally said, without raising his eyes, "congratulations, you won. Everything worked out for you. You hid everything you could, did what you wanted, and I was made a fool. Well done." He then took the pistol out of its holster and placed it on the table against the wall. It seemed to Brandon and Emma that the worst moment had come. But Lucas didn't point the gun at them. He just left it there, within reach, without going too far. He didn't seem to be afraid of them using weapons against him. Perhaps he didn't care anymore. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, trying to speak softly, almost plaintively. Lucas sighed heavily. "I understood one thing. No one cares how I continue to live, and I don't care either. You made your choice, and I will make mine." "Don't say that," Brandon exclaimed, getting up from the floor. "We understand that we made a terrible mistake. But maybe there is still a chance." "A chance for what?" Lucas barked. "That I will forget how my wife was pregnant with someone else's child? How did you both lie to my face every single day?" Emma suddenly couldn't stand it. "I know we are guilty. But Lucas, I beg you, don't ruin your life completely. We've already done it, don't make it worse." Her words only seemed to unsettle him. He took a step towards the table where the gun lay and grabbed it so that Brandon recoiled in horror, thinking that the shot would ring out right now. But Lucas didn't point the gun at them. His hand trembled, and his gaze seemed to be directed into emptiness. "I understood one simple truth," he muttered, as if addressing himself. "The meaning of my life has collapsed. Marriage, home, future children, all this turned out to be fiction. And it doesn't matter whether I punish you or forgive you. I have nowhere to return." "Lucas, no," Emma shouted, guessing what he was thinking about. "Forgive us, please, but don't do this. Sorry." He curled his lips contemptuously. "You say sorry, but everything inside me screams that I no longer see the point in tomorrow. I was ready to do a lot for the sake of love, for the sake of our family. And what was left? Emptiness." The trembling in his hands intensified, and Brandon took a cautious step forward. "Listen, don't. It's our fault, but it shouldn't be like that. We should be responsible, not you. If you do something to yourself now, it's wrong." Lucas smiled bitterly. "Of course, you must answer. What about me? Do you think I want to spend the rest of my days watching you try to make amends? I don't need it. I'm tired." Then he looked at the gun. The seconds dragged on painfully. Emma jumped out of bed, squealing. "No, not this." She rushed towards him, hoping to take the weapon, but Lucas threw her aside. Brandon also rushed, but everything happened too quickly. Lucas managed to retreat, holding the gun to his chest so they couldn't knock it out. "Stop," Brandon shouted, gasping for air. "Think about it. You don't want such a death. This is crazy. Madness." Lucas asked bitterly. "Wasn't everything you did crazy to me?" He stopped at the wall where there were photographs from his past life. Him and Emma on the beach, smiling in the sun, him giving her flowers for their anniversary, them among friends. All this has become hated ghosts. Lucas ran his hand over the glass of the photo frame, as if saying goodbye. "Lucas," Emma said pleadingly, rising from the floor. Horror flashed in her eyes. "Don't die. Forgive me, please. I'm ready to live with guilt. Just don't leave like that." "Amazing," he replied sarcastically, continuing to stare at the photographs. "You used to be afraid that I would kill you, and now you're begging me not to kill myself. How quickly priorities change." His fingers slowly slid over the trigger, and Brandon felt like his heart was about to burst out of his chest. He never thought that he would witness a person decide to die, much less a person to whom he had inflicted a mortal spiritual wound. It all turned into a crazy whirlpool of pain. "Forgive me," he whispered, coming closer. "I don't know how to make up for what we did. But killing yourself is wrong. You can start again without us. You will have the opportunity." "New life?" Lucas smiled wryly. "With what?" "With the consciousness that all plans have collapsed, and I will never be able to trust people the way I did. Drops of sweat ran down his forehead, and his hand continued to tremble. It was as if he was waging an internal struggle, either trying to decide on the last step or hoping that someone would give him a reason to live. But the pain was too strong. "Maybe this is your punishment," he said finally. "Look at me. Look what you've brought me to. Then live with it." "No, no, no," Emma sobbed, pressing her hands to her chest. "I beg you, I will do everything to regain your trust, or we'll break up if it's better. But please don't hurt yourself." Lucas sighed, as if he was tired of all this talk. He looked at the photos again, remembering how happy he was and how things had turned out now. Unbearable melancholy filled his mind. Then something in him snapped. He closed his eyes, gripping the gun tighter. Emma and Brandon froze, realizing that something irreparable could happen. "Sorry," was all Lucas said, and at that moment a shot rang out. The sound deafened the room and Emma screamed, rushing forward as Brandon jumped up, trying to take the weapon away. The gun fell from Lucas's hands, falling to the floor with a clatter. The silence was broken by a wild groan. Emma pressed her palms to her head, realizing what had happened. Lucas sank against the wall, wheezing convulsively. A crimson stain was spreading in his chest. He pulled the trigger, pointing the gun at himself. "No," Emma screamed, grabbing her husband's hands, seeing his eyes roll back in his head. "Oh my God, Lucas, no, hold on." Brandon rushed around in a panic, looking for a phone to call an ambulance, not knowing what to do first. The bell rang, but time passed too quickly for Lucas. He looked at Emma as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. His lips moved, but the air no longer filled his lungs. He only felt that he was finally free from unbearable pain, but life itself was leaving along with it. "Please forgive me," Emma whispered, pressing her face to his. Endless tears flowed from her eyes. Lucas's fingers trembled for a moment, as if he wanted to touch her cheek, but then dropped. It seemed to Brandon that he himself was going crazy, having become an unwitting witness to the tragedy that their common guilt led to. The ambulance arrived before it could save Lucas' life, and the couple opened the door slightly to let paramedics through. Doctors stated a serious injury, but the pulse was so weak that time passed by seconds. While Emma was wailing and Brandon was frantically explaining that all this was the result of an insane scandal, the resuscitators tried to stop the bleeding. But Lucas was already in a borderline state. "He's still breathing," one of the doctors shouted. "Get to the car." Emma rushed after her, but she was pushed away, freeing up space. Brandon was also not allowed to pass. In the corridor, one could hear abrupt commands and the clatter of instruments. It seemed that there was panic and chaos in the air, and the walls were still saturated with the smell of gunpowder and blood. A couple of minutes later, the doors slammed and the ambulance was rushed away to the sound of wailing sirens. Emma stood outside in the cold wind, not feeling her body, watching the red glimmers disappear into the distance. Brandon, standing next to her, did not dare to touch her. He understood that this romance of theirs destroyed everything to the ground. It destroyed Lucas' life, tore Emma's soul apart, and stained the house with grief. And perhaps not only the house, but also the hearts of all participants. The minutes dragged on as they stood aimlessly in the driveway, surrounded by neighbors who watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded. Someone tried to ask questions, but Emma couldn't speak, and Brandon just muttered, "I don't know. I don't understand." As the doors closed behind the ambulance, the world around Emma and Brandon stopped. The siren died down somewhere in the distance, and silence fell, heavy, cold, filled with an unbearable feeling of guilt. Emma stood motionless, her arms hanging limply along her body, her face frozen in horror. Brandon was there, but she didn't see him, as if he had disappeared from her reality the second Lucas pulled the trigger. "We did this," she said barely audibly, as if to herself. "It's our fault." Brandon opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. What could be the answer? No words could change what happened in the room, where there was blood and a dark stain on the wall. Emma slowly turned towards the house. The light in the living room windows seemed ominous, as if the place itself was rejecting them, not allowing them to return. "I can't go back there," she whispered in a trembling voice. "Never again." Brandon gently touched her shoulder, but Emma pulled back sharply, as if his hand had burned her. "Don't touch me," she breathed with undisguised disgust. "It was all a mistake. The worst mistake of my life." He took a step back, lowering his eyes. Both understood that now they were not connected by love or desire, only unbearable pain and guilt, which destroyed all previous feelings. "Do you think he will survive?" Brandon asked, afraid to hear the answer. Emma shook her head, looking into space. "Even if he survives, he will never be the same again. We killed him before the shot was even fired." A police car appeared on the doorstep of the house. Two officers emerged from it, heading towards them. Questions, interrogations, explanations, all this seemed unimportant and meaningless now. Emma watched impassively as the officers approached, realizing that nothing would change the terrible ending of this night. One of the policemen began to ask something, but she did not hear the words. Lucas's voice still sounded in my ears, his last phrase, "I'm sorry." For the first time in a long time, Emma clearly understood how terrible the price they had paid for their lies and betrayal. Faces flashed around, people moved, trying to figure it out. But Emma was already far away from here. She was in the past, where she could still fix everything, in a world that no longer existed. Lucas spent several weeks in the hospital after he decided to pull the trigger. The shot was not fatal for him. The doctors managed to stabilize his condition, but the recovery promised to be long and painful. He woke up in a room with many devices, and his head was empty. Every minute his memories came back to him, and his own act, an attempt at suicide, inspired a bitter realization. He ended his life almost of his own free will, and even though salvation came in time, he understood that the past remained beyond the bounds, and the future seemed vague. The police received a signal from doctors about a suicide attempt, but soon during the investigation details emerged that turned the situation around. It turned out that, before the fatal shot, Lucas held his wife and her lover in the house, threatening them with a weapon, and then decided to commit suicide. However, a meticulous investigator named James Smith did not limit himself to superficial evidence. It seemed to him that everything was too confusing. A quarrel, betrayal, a huge conflict, everything could push Lucas to extreme measures, but was it purely his own will? When Lucas was transferred from intensive care to a regular ward, the investigator appeared with a folder of materials, intending to ask a series of questions. Lucas lay motionless, staring at the ceiling. A mixture of devastation and shame was visible on his face. He, to tell the truth, did not want to communicate with anyone, but James spoke firmly and confidently. "Good afternoon, my name is Smith. I am in charge of your case. The case is about a suicide attempt, or more precisely, about the possibility of driving you to suicide. There are a few points we would like to clarify." Lucas turned his head towards him. His eyes were dull. He spoke with difficulty. "What do you want to know?" "For starters," the investigator raised an eyebrow, "can you confirm that your wife is Emma Moore, and that she had, uh, an intimate affair with a certain Brandon, whose last name we are still clarifying?" Lucas clenched his jaw and nodded. "Yes, Emma Moore, and the lover's name is Brandon. I didn't know his last name and wasn't interested then. It was enough for me to know that he stole my wife." There was old pain in the voice, but without the same rage. Everything that happened took the strength out of Lucas. "I understand," Smith said quietly. "And after you found out about their relationship, you arranged a meeting at home, or rather a trap." "A trap?" Lucas asked bitterly. "I pretended that I had gone on a business trip and returned to find them. I had a weapon. I wanted to intimidate, but everything got out of control." "You are facing charges of unlawful imprisonment," the investigator noted. "But now we are talking about something else. We have information from your neighbors that before the shot you shouted that you don't see the point in living. And after a while, when you were taken away, Emma told the doctors that it was their betrayal, their behavior that drove you to suicide. So, Lucas became gloomy. "I'm not shifting the blame. Yes, they betrayed me. Yes, I was desperate. But it's my choice. to pull the trigger or not. Smith leafed through the papers. That's right, but the criminal code has an article about incitement to suicide. If we have evidence that Emma and her lover deliberately, systematically humiliated, blackmailed, or otherwise pushed you to take this step, then it is possible to blame them. Lucas smiled wryly. Especially, I don't think they forced me to kill myself. Rather, they didn't care what happened to me. But, he thought for a moment, remembering all the details of their betrayal, how Emma took Brandon straight to his house and spent their joint money on her lover. Insult after insult, false words, cold detachment, as if everything that was dear to Lucas was trampled and ridiculed behind his back. Of course, this was a moral failure. But did they want him to die? I don't know exactly, he muttered. They didn't tell me, go shoot yourself. But with their actions, yes, they may have brought me to the brink. I understand, the investigator responded. We will interrogate them. There are reasons to believe that there may be aggravating circumstances here. A couple of days later, Emma and Brandon were called to the station. Emma came with teary eyes and trembling hands. It seemed to her that Lucas had died, and she only recently found out that he survived, but in serious condition. Brandon didn't look any better. He looked fearful and confused. They sat opposite the investigator, who asked dry, tough questions. Mrs. Moore, do you admit that you cheated on your husband for a long time? Yes, Emma whispered. It's my fault. And you, Mr. Brandon, do you also admit that you were in a relationship with a married woman and at the same time used her money? Brandon nodded, looking down. Yes, it was. But I didn't force her. She herself. She wanted to help me with my debts. Why do you think that your behavior is not provocative? The investigator asked coldly, checking the materials. Lies for many months, appearing in the house in the absence of the husband, spending common funds. All this could drive a person to suicide. How would you comment? I don't. Brandon began, but stopped short. The questions were awkward, and the guilt weighed on him. I didn't want him to kill himself. I didn't think it would come to this. Emma sobbed. I didn't want to either. I was afraid that Lucas would leave me, but I didn't want him to die. I thought he wouldn't find out anything. It was a mistake. Error? Smith raised an eyebrow. You brought your lover to a common house and spent money that was apparently set aside for joint purposes. Error, you say? And here's the result. The man almost died. The interrogation lasted several hours, during which new details were revealed. It turned out that Emma was transferring Brandon not just one amount, but a whole series of payments. The total amount exceeded $10,000. Brandon admitted that he owed money for the business, and Emma gave him the money with a promise to pay him back. But he still hasn't returned a cent. All this formed a motivational chain. Lucas could feel humiliated, robbed, and deceived. The investigator became increasingly convinced that, although Emma and Brandon did not directly push Lucas to commit suicide, their treacherous behavior could be considered extreme, especially since they continued to deceive and mock him. Ultimately, the prosecutor's office decided to open a case under the article on incitement to suicide. Emma and Brandon were charged. Initially without detention, they were released on their own recognizance. But the public outcry was great. Society was shocked by the story of how two lovers, with their meanness, forced a man to shoot himself in the chest. And they did it in his own house. Meanwhile, Lucas, gradually coming to his senses, tried to understand what would happen to his life next. Lying under Eves, he saw the same nightmare every night. Emma and Brandon laughing at him, discussing him in whispers in front of his eyes. But the doctors slowly got him back on his feet. The bullet damaged a rib and passed close to the lung, but without critical damage to the heart tissue. However, the emotional wound turned out to be much worse than the physical one. He slowly took steps along the hospital corridor, leaning on the handrail, examined the sterile wounds, then returned to his own. At any moment, an investigator or a lawyer from the prosecutor's office could arrive to take testimony. For the first time, Lucas realized that under the law, Emma and Brandon could get real time if they were found guilty. Will this really calm me down? He mentally asked himself. Will putting them behind bars relieve me of pain? However, the law remained the law. When the court hearings began, Lucas received the right to be present, albeit in a wheelchair, until he regained full mobility. The courtroom was full of journalists. They were not interested in the truth. They wanted big headlines. Somewhere in the depths of his soul, Lucas was disgusted by this, but he understood that it now depended on him what kind of testimony he would give. During the hearing, the prosecutor harshly stated that Emma and Brandon committed deliberate actions that humiliated the dignity of their husband, created unbearable conditions in the family, and pushed him to decide to commit suicide. The couple's lawyers objected. He was not locked up. We did not blackmail him, did not threaten him. But the prosecutor retorted, systematic humiliation, constant lies, waste of common property, and leading a double life are also considered moral pressure. Sitting in his chair, Lucas felt his insides clench as Emma's lawyer asked, "Tell me, Mr. Moore, do you really think that your wife wanted you dead?" Lucas sighed heavily. "Don't know. She probably didn't think I would do something like that. But she knew how painfully her betrayal hurt me. And you believe that her actions were intended to break you. Maybe they didn't intend to, but—" He fell silent, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. "They left me no way to escape. I lived in the feeling that everything was lost. This was the end for me." The whole process seemed absurd, but the court considered the facts. Long-term infidelity, use of shared funds without the husband's knowledge, psychological pressure, and constant deception. In some countries, incitement to suicide is interpreted as threat, blackmail, or abuse. The prosecutor insisted that there was precisely a long period of moral torture, albeit unintentional. Emma gave confusing testimony. She cried, asked to forgive her, said that she did not want Lucas to suffer. Brandon looked depressed and admitted his guilt, but claimed they didn't want to force him to commit suicide. However, the judges paid attention to the financial aspect, the marriage accounts, which he squandered. This resulted in another article, Fraud Committed by Prior Conspiracy, although lawyers tried to prove that Emma gave the money voluntarily. At the end of the hearing, the verdict sounded harsh. Everyone received a real sentence. The court recognized that their actions in their totality led to, formally leading to a suicide attempt, seeing this as an analog of moral violence, albeit indirect. Emma was given a year in prison and Brandon 1.5, given that he benefited from the situation and actually took advantage of the family budget. Many were shocked by the verdict, but, as the judge said, violence is not always expressed in direct blackmail and threats. Prolonged betrayal and moral pressure can lead a person to a fatal decision. As the handcuffed prisoners left the hall, a crowd of reporters rushed towards them, trying to ask questions. Emma didn't answer any of them. She just walked without looking up. Brandon looked confused, as if he didn't fully believe that he would be imprisoned for just treason. Lucas sat to the side, a pained grimace on his face. He saw them being taken away and felt a strange emptiness. "Is this what I wanted?" he asked himself. "Will putting them behind bars relieve me of pain?" But the judicial machine had already started, and he was unable to change its course. He quietly left the court, dreaming only of returning to the hospital and continuing his treatment, and then moving away. It seemed to him that in this city every street, every corner reminded of the tragedy. He decided to go to his friends in another state. Doctors promised that he would recover physically soon, although the psychological damage could remain for years. A week later, Lucas left his hospital bed. "I collected the remaining things not so much, because the house where he and Emma lived was now put up for sale, and the lawyers were busy with formalities. He didn't want to look at these walls, saturated with lies. He left for another city, where he rented a small apartment. I took tests at a local clinic and found a psychotherapist. Little by little, I learned to live again." He was not happy with the thought that Emma and Brandon would be in prison. Anyway, nothing would return him to his former trust, his former bright feelings. But deep down, he knew that some would call it justice. Few people understood that true justice does not bring back lost love or erase memories. It only leaves the verdict on paper and the unfortunate people in the cell, and even more unhappy people outside it. A few months later, investigator Smith called him, informing him that the convictions had entered into force, the appeals were rejected. Lucas thanked him for the information, but didn't feel any relief. He smiled a bitter smile and, thanking her, hung up. In the evening, going outside, he saw the sun setting. The wind blew across his face, and looking at the orange-pink colors of the sky, Lucas felt that life would go on anyway. Without Emma, without the same hopes, with a scar on the chest and a scar in the soul, but it still continues. He took a deep breath, trying to feel what it was like to be alive, and at that very moment it suddenly seemed to him as if somewhere in the depths of his consciousness a tiny desire was being born to live further for his own sake, without illusions, without other people's expectations. Just live. Let them answer to the law, he thought. I answered in front of myself. There's nothing more I can do. Turning around, he walked away along the deserted street, leaving the shadow of the past behind him. In the distance, the cityscape roared with people hurrying about business, unaware of his tragedy. And perhaps it was in this anonymity that he had a chance to find peace. All that remains is to learn to trust life again, even after the most terrible betrayal and loss. And Emma and Brandon, having spent time in prison, will also learn a lesson. Sometimes lies and betrayal can lead to much more serious consequences than they could imagine. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.